The economy of Iran is a mixed and transition economy with a large public sector. Some 60% of the economy is centrally planned. It is dominated by oil and gas production, although over 40 industries are directly involved in the Tehran Stock Exchange, one of the best-performing exchanges in the world over the past decade. With 10% of the world's proven oil reserves and 15% of its gas reserves, Iran is considered an energy superpower. It is the world's 18th largest by purchasing power parity and 29 by nominal gross domestic product. The country is a member of Next 11 because of its high development potential. A unique feature of Iran's economy is the presence of large religious foundations called Bonyad, whose combined budgets represent more than 30% of central government spending. Price controls and subsidies, particularly on food and energy, burden the economy. Contraband, administrative controls, widespread corruption, and other restrictive factors undermine private sector-led growth. The legislature in late 2009 passed the Subsidy Reform Plan. This is the most extensive economic reform since the government implemented gasoline rationing in 2007. Most of the country's exports are oil and gas, accounting for a majority of government revenue in 2010. Oil export revenues enabled Iran to amass well over $100 billion in foreign exchange reserves as of 2010. Iran ranked first in scientific growth in the world in 2011 and has one of the fastest development in telecommunication globally. Due to its relative isolation from global financial markets, Iran was initially able to avoid recession in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis. Yet, following increasingly stringent sanctions imposed by the international community as a result of the country's nuclear program, oil exports fell by half, allowing Iraqi oil exports to overtake Iran's for the first time since the 1980s. In September 2012, the Iranian rial fell to a record low of 23,900 to the US dollar. Exports aided self-sufficiency and domestic investment, although double-digit unemployment and inflation remain problematic. Iran's educated population, high human development, constrained economy and insufficient foreign and domestic investment prompted an increasing number of Iranians to seek overseas employment, resulting in a significant brain drain. History. In 546 BC, Croesus of Lydia was defeated and captured by the Persians, who then adopted gold as the main metal for their coins. There are accounts, in the biblical book of Esther, of dispatches being sent from Susa to provinces as far out as India and the Kingdom of Kush during the reign of Xerxes the Great. By the time of Herodotus, the royal road of the Persian Empire ran some 2,857 kilometers from the city of Susa on the Karun to the port of Smyrna on the Aegean Sea. Modern agriculture in Iran dates back to the 1820s, when Emir Kabir undertook a number of changes to the traditional agricultural system. Such changes included importing modified seeds and signing collaboration contracts with other countries. Polyakov's Bank Estekrazi was bought in 1898 by the Tsarist government of Russia, and later passed into the hands of the Iranian government by a contract in 1920. The bank continued its activities under the name of Bank Iran until 1933, when incorporating the newly founded Keshavatsi Bank. The Imperial Bank of Persia was established in 1885, with offices in all major cities of Persia. Reza Shah Pahlavi improved the country's overall infrastructure, implemented educational reform, campaigned against foreign influence, reformed the legal system, and introduced modern industries. During this time, Iran experienced a period of social change, economic development, and relative political stability. Reza Shah Pahlavi, who abdicated in 1941, was succeeded by his son, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. No fundamental change occurred in the economy of Iran during World War II and the years immediately following. However, between 1954 and 1960 a rapid increase in oil revenues and sustained foreign aid led to greater investment and fast-paced economic growth, primarily in the government sector. Subsequently, inflation increased, the value of the national currency depreciated, and a foreign trade deficit developed. Economic policies implemented to combat these problems led to declines in the rates of nominal economic growth and per capita income by 1961. Prior to 1979, Iran developed rapidly. Traditionally agricultural, by the 1970s the country had undergone significant industrialization and modernization. The pace slowed by 1978 as capital flight reached $30 to $40 billion 1980 US dollars just before the revolution. Following the nationalizations in 1979 and the outbreak of the Iran-Iraq War, over 80% of the economy came under government control. The 8-year war with Iraq claimed at least 300,000 Iranian lives and injured more than 500,000. The cost of the war to the country's economy was some $500 billion. After hostilities ceased in 1988, the government tried to develop the country's communication, transportation, manufacturing, healthcare, education and energy sectors, and began integrating its communication and transportation systems with those of neighboring states. The government's long-term objectives since the revolution were stated as economic independence, full employment, and a comfortable standard of living, but at the end of the 20th century, the economy faced many obstacles. Iran's population more than doubled between 1980 and 2000 and its median age declined. Although many Iranians are farmers, agricultural production has consistently fallen since the 1960s. By the late 1990s, Iran imported much of its food. At that time, economic hardship in the countryside resulted in many people moving to cities. Macroeconomic trends. More than two-thirds of the population are under the age of 30. Net primary school enrollment is almost 100%, suggesting a secondary demographic boom. Iran's national science budget in 2005 was about $900 million, roughly equivalent to the 1990 figure. By early 2000, Iran allocated around 0.4% of its GDP to research and development, ranking the country behind the world average of 1.4%. In 2009 the ratio of research to GDP was 0.87% against the government's medium-term target of 2.5%. Iran ranked first in scientific growth in the world in 2011 and 17th in science production in 2012. According to The Economist, Iran ranked 39th in a list of industrialized nations, producing $23 billion of industrial products in 2008. Between 2008 and 2009 Iran moved to 28th from 69th place in annual industrial production growth because of its relative isolation from the 2008 international financial crisis. In the early 21st century the service sector was the country's largest, followed by industry and agriculture. In 2008 GDP was estimated at $382.3 billion, or $5,470 per capita. Nominal GDP is projected to double in the next 5 years. However, real GDP growth is expected to average 2.2% a year in 2012 to 16, insufficient to reduce the unemployment rate. Furthermore, international sanctions have damaged the economy by reducing oil exports by half. The Iranian rial lost more than half of its value in 2012, directing Iran at an import substitution, industrialization and a resistive economy. According to the International Monetary Fund, Iran is a transition economy, i.e., changing from a planned to a market economy. The United Nations classifies Iran's economy as semi-developed. In 2014, Iran ranked 83rd in the World Economic Forum's analysis of the global competitiveness of 144 countries. Political, policy and currency stability is regarded as the most problematic factor in doing business in Iran. Difficulty in accessing financing is also a major concern, especially for small and medium enterprises. According to Goldman Sachs, Iran has the potential to become one of the world's largest economies in the 21st century. 250,500,000, 751,000, 1,251,000, 500, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, 2015, GDP, PPP, million. GDP per capita, PPP, National Economic Planning. Following annual approval of the government's budget by Majlis, the central bank presents a detailed monetary and credit policy to the Money and Credit Council for approval. Thereafter, major elements of these policies are incorporated into the 5-year Economic Development Plan. The Fifth Development Plan, for 2010 to 15, is designed to delegate power to the people and develop a knowledge economy. The plan is part of Vision 2025, a strategy for a long-term sustainable growth. Economic reform plan. Expansion of public health care and international relations are the other main objectives of the fifth plan. An ambitious series of measures that include subsidy reform, banking, currency, taxation, customs, construction, employment, nationwide goods and services distribution, social justice and productivity. The intent is to make the country self-sufficient by 2015 and replace the payment of $100 billion in subsidies annually with targeted social assistance. These reforms target the country's major sources of inefficiency and price distortion and are likely to lead to major restructuring of almost all economic sectors. As such, by removing energy subsidies, Iran intends to make its industries more efficient and competitive. By 2016, one-third of Iran's economic growth is expected to originate from productivity improvement. Energy subsidies left the country one of the world's least energy efficient, with energy intensity 3 times the global average and 2.5 times higher than the Middle Eastern average. The banking sector is seen as a potential hedge against the removal of subsidies, as the plan is not expected to directly impact banks. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani stated in 2014 that the country has the potential to become one of the 10 largest economies within the next 30 years. Fiscal and monetary policy. Since the 1979 revolution, government spending has averaged 59% on social policies, 17% on economic matters, 15% on national defense, and 13% on general affairs. Payments averaged 39% on education, health and social security, 20% on other social programs, 3% on agriculture, 16% on water, power and gas, 5% on manufacturing and mining, 12% on roads and transportation and 5% on other economic affairs. Iran's investment reached 27.7% of GDP in 2009. Between 2002 and 2006, inflation fluctuated around 14%. In 2008, around 55% of government revenue came from oil and natural gas revenue, with 31% from taxes and fees. There are virtually millions of people who do not pay taxes in Iran and hence operate outside the formal economy. The budget for year 2012 was $462 billion, 9% less than 2011. The budget is based on an oil price of $85 per barrel. The value of the US dollar is estimated at 12,260 Iranian rials for the same period, according to the head of the Department of Statistics of Iran. If the rules of budgeting were observed, the government could save at least 30 to 35% on its expenses. The central bank's interest rate is 21%, and the inflation rate has climbed to 22% in 2012, 10% higher than in 2011. There is little alignment between fiscal and monetary policy. According to the Central Bank of Iran, the gap between the rich and the poor narrowed because of monthly subsidies, but the trend could reverse if high inflation persists. Iran had an estimated $110 billion in foreign reserves in 2011 and balances its external payments by pricing oil at approximately $75 per barrel. As of 2013, only $30 to $50 billion of those reserves are accessible because of current sanctions. Iranian media has questioned the reason behind Iran's government non-repatriation of its foreign reserves before the imposition of the latest round of sanctions and failure to convert into gold. As a consequence, the Iranian rial lost more than 40% of its value between December 2011 and April 2012. Iran's external and fiscal accounts reflect falling oil prices in 2012-13, but remain in surplus. The current account was expected to reach a surplus of 2.1% of GDP in 2012-13, and the net fiscal balance will register a surplus of 0.3% of GDP. In 2013, the external debt stood at $7.2 billion, down from $17.3 billion in 2012. Iran's GDP is predicted to grow 2.8% in 2014. Provinces of Iran by contribution to national GDP. Socio-economic expenditures. Economic sectors. Inflation rate. Market liquidity. CPI, broad money and foreign exchange reserves. US dollar, Iranian rial exchange rate. Debt service. Balance of payment. TEPIX versus DJIA and oil prices. Oil production and consumption. Oil and gas production. Ownership. Following the hostilities with Iraq, the government declared its intention to privatize most industries and to liberalize and decentralize the economy. Sale of state-owned companies proceeded slowly, mainly due to opposition by a nationalist majority in the parliament. In 2006, most industries, some 70% of the economy, remained state-owned. The majority of heavy industries including steel, petrochemicals, copper, automobiles, and machine tools remained in the public sector, with most light industry privately owned. Article 44 of the Iranian constitution declares that the country's economy should consist of state, cooperative and private sectors based. The state sector includes all large-scale industries, foreign trade, major, minerals, banking, insurance, power generation, dams and large-scale irrigation networks, radio and television, post, telegraph and telephone services, aviation, shipping, roads, railroads and the like. These are publicly owned and administered by the state. Cooperative companies and enterprises concerned with production and distribution in urban and rural areas form the basis of the cooperative sector, and operated in accordance with Sharia law. As of 2012, 5,923 consumer cooperatives employed 128,396. Consumer cooperatives have over 6 million members. Private sector operating construction, agriculture, animal husbandry, industry, trade, and services that supplement the economic activities of the state and cooperative sectors. Since Article 44 has never been strictly enforced, the private sector has played a much larger role than that outlined in the Constitution. In recent years, the role of this sector has increased. A 2004 constitutional amendment allows 80% of state assets to be privatized. 40% of such sales are to be conducted through the Justice Shares scheme and the rest through the Tehran Stock Exchange. The government would retain the remaining 20%. In 2005, government assets were estimated at around $120 billion. Some $63 billion of such assets were privatized from 2005 to 2010, reducing the government's direct share of GDP from 80% to 40%. Many companies in Iran remain uncompetitive because of mismanagement over the years, thus making privatization less attractive for potential investors. According to then-President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, 60% of Iran's wealth is controlled by just 300 people. Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps are thought to control about one-third of Iran's economy through subsidiaries and trusts. Estimates by the Los Angeles Times suggest IRGC has ties to over 100 companies and annual revenue in excess of $12 billion. Particularly in construction. The Ministry of Petroleum awarded IRGC billions of dollars in no-bid contracts as well as major infrastructure projects. Tasked with border control, IRGC maintains a monopoly on smuggling, costing Iranian companies billions of dollars each year. Smuggling is encouraged in part by the generous subsidization of domestic goods. IRGC also runs laser eye surgery clinics, makes cars, builds bridges and roads, and develops oil and gas fields. Religious foundations welfare programs for the needy are managed by more than 30 public agencies alongside semi-state organizations known as bonyads, together with several private non-governmental organizations. Bonyads are a consortium of over 120 tax-exempt organizations that receive subsidies and religious donations. They answer directly to the supreme leader of Iran and control over 20% of GDP, operating everything from vast soybean and cotton farms to hotels, soft drink, auto manufacturing and shipping lines. They are seen as overstaffed, corrupt and generally unprofitable. Boneyard companies also compete with Iran's unprotected private sector, whose firms complain of the difficulty of competing with the subsidized bonyads. Bonyads are not subject to audit or Iran's accounting laws. Set it as a multi-sector business organization, with holdings of 37 companies, and an estimated value of $95 billion. It is under the control of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and created from thousands of properties confiscated from Iranians.